before I introduce our first speaker, I'm going to put a couple of things in the chat just to be reference materials. So first, that is a link to the schedule for the 4 classes that we're doing. I think I recognize most of y'all's faces, but if you've missed some of the earlier classes that we've been doing, those are all going up on YouTube on the website so that you can watch again if once was not, enough to really sink in for you. And then this is the 3rd class, and after the 4th class, a week after that, there's going to be a very exciting Refuges and Precepts ceremony for anyone that wants to formally commit to those things and within the community. And you get a groovy Buddhist name if you wish, if you do that, and that's always very exciting. All right, and the second thing that I'm going to post in the chat is a PDF document, and that is the study guide that goes with the presentations today. Ted, you are raising your hand.
Thank you, Lily. I'm sorry for interjecting here. I just wanted everybody to know that we are recording this, but it only records whoever is speaking. You don't see anybody else's image, in case anyone was concerned, just the speaker view. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Ted. I very much appreciate that reminder. And as usual, if you want to chat with either of the presenters we've got today for further questions, after we finish the recording part at the end, there'll be some time where you can get their emails in the chat. And we're not going to put that up during the recording because that's a privacy issue, but you'll definitely be able to get contact info and follow up with either of our presenters. And then the third thing I'm putting in the chat is a page that I found on the website it's got a list of the 10 precepts themselves right there. It's kind of a, quick and dirty reference if you want something to look back to while we're presenting. The format's going to be a little bit different than last week. Instead of having a presenter and then questions and then a presenter and then questions, we're going to do the presenters and then we're going to do the questions, and that'll probably flow pretty nicely, I think. And so without further ado, I am so excited that our first presenter is going to be Reverend Scott. He's a minister. He's a real mensch. I am always impressed with his gentleness and his equanimity. And so, Reverend Scott, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Minjak. Bear with me for 1 second here. Okay. You're seeing this schedule now, aren't you? That's not what I want to share. Okay, almost there. There we go. Everybody see 5 great precepts on the screen? Excellent. Okay, okay, thank you for your patience while I'm getting organized here. But the 10 precepts are very prominently posted on the wall in the temple at Mount Adam's Buddhist temple. And when I first saw these, when I first walked into the temple and looked at that, my reaction was, yeah, I got that, no problem. And I kind of then just forgot about them because they just seemed, oh, yeah, I do that. I got that. It was years later during a Dharma talk where I realized that these precepts can be interpreted in a bunch of different ways. And that's when it really hit me that I shouldn't be, my attitude of, yeah, I got that. I was totally missing the boat. So I'm going to get into the precepts and then some obvious and some non-obvious ways of interpreting them. And then also how we apply these to ourselves. But just as an intro to the 5 great precepts, the great contemporary teacher, Reverend Ching Shui, recently referred to the precepts as like rumble strips on the road. And I just loved that, because it's not like these are rules, if you break them, you get in trouble. These are to keep you on the path, the middle road of the path. So I loved that analogy to rumble strips on the road. Now, a novice or a lay person would take anywhere from 4 or 5 to 10 of them, whatever you're comfortable with. Novice monks, I believe, take 10, and if you're a full monk, you take anywhere from, I've seen numbers from 120 to 348, and you'll find different lineages using different numbers, but the bottom line is you can start off small and accept more of them as time goes on, as you feel comfortable. So why do we have these precepts? That's something that I was confused about at first, and it was explained to me that 2,600 years ago, civilization was a little more unruly than it is now. And when you start wandering through India, gathering up devotees from different, and India is a very multicultural country, things might get a little out of hand. So these were kind of a matter of necessity to kind of just keep order and harmony within the Sangha 2,600 years ago. So in one way, they were kind of, certainly when you get to the 300 precepts, kind of unique to that time period, but the core precepts are timeless. They also have global applications, not to just ourselves. And in Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Old Path, White Clouds, Buddha he kind of quotes the Buddha as saying, the Buddha is talking to a king. If your majesty and all high-ranking officials study and observe these 5 precepts, the kingdom will benefit greatly. So I'm going to dedicate this talk to our world's leaders right now. So these are guidelines, but once you become a monastic or become a monk or a nun, it kind of ratchets it up to the next level, and you have to take them quite a bit more seriously. So with that, I'm going to continue on to the first of the precepts. I resolve not to kill, but to cherish all life. And you'll see this worded differently, but the essence is the same. I'm taking the text that is hanging on the wall in the temple. Let's see. So the obvious is refrain from killing. That I think we all get. The not so obvious, then we get into things like, eating meat, being vegetarian. Is that considered killing? So this is actually a picture that is posted by a monk, who many of us know. And he has decided that he does not need to be vegetarian. He, eats meat, and he's okay with that. So it's not for one person to judge another in terms of how they interpret these precepts. So that's a very important part of this. This is not a these are not guidelines we use against one another. These are guidelines that we use for our own path. And so in doing so, yeah, it's very important to make sure you don't judge other people, because there's a bit of a there's always a gray area. So where do you draw the line with not killing? I've heard stories of construction projects in Tibet being brought to a screeching halt because the people digging were digging through the earth before they put their shovel in it to try and remove any worms or insects that are in the ground. So that's, that's a level of observance of this that we probably wouldn't all be able to adopt in our day-to-day life. There's another kind of not so obvious interpretation of this, and I'm going to quote, let's see here. I'm quoting a student here of Matsuoka Roshi's, who said, "The obvious instances of our diet consisting of animal products or garden or lawn care supplemented by the use of insecticides and weed killers begin to pale in the context of our ever-widening ripple effects around our consumption of products and packaging that result in whole islands of plastics polluting the great oceans of the earth, with the concomitant pollution from the manufacturing and shipping processes of international trade." So, even our excessive consumption leads to suffering and, and death of suffering and death of, be it animals or just the starvation or just the limited resources of our world. So this can even boil down to just how we practice our consumption. Are we conspicuous consumptions, or do we consume in moderation? Again, not so obvious. And the graphic there is a shakucho, which some monks will actually walk with and hold in front of them to scare away snakes and bugs and spiders that may be walking along so they don't step on them. Again, are we all going to do this? This is where it becomes an individual decision. Some monks do this, lay people generally don't. It becomes a very individual decision. Elliston Roshi, that is the quote that came from earlier. Just noticed that here. And he also goes on to say, the resources of the earth are finite, but America consumes far more than its share as determined by this population alone. And again, distribution of food throughout the world is very uneven. So the next precept is, I resolve not to take what is not given, but to respect others. The obvious is don't steal. I think we all get that. The not so obvious is the little things like, companies that applied for COVID-19 relief that really didn't need it. Or again, living in extravagance, taking more than you need. That can kind of fall into both the first and the second precept. So be mindful of, living, taking the path of the middle road and avoiding excess. And, where do you draw the line? It's not always so obvious. This one also, actually both the first and the second precepts, we need to reflect back on ourselves, because when we are, how many times do we go through life? You're driving along, you're just totally lost in thought. You're thinking about oh my gosh, what did I do yesterday, or what am I going to do tomorrow? You're just kind of absorbed by thoughts, and you miss your exit on the highway. I mean, it's easy to get kind of wrapped up in non-mindfulness. It's just kind of losing sight of the present moment. And you're kind of stealing life away from yourself. You're kind of robbing yourself, and you're not cherishing life. So here you can actually, in a way, be not so much killing yourself, but not cherishing your life. You're stealing the opportunity to live your life to the fullest. So in so many little ways, we're not literally, but figuratively killing ourselves and stealing from ourselves. I had never thought of it that way. And when I heard a Dharma talk years later after seeing these precepts on the temple wall, it hit me like a ton of bricks. It's, wow, I'm breaking these two precepts on myself. And that was really very eye-opening kind of revelation for me. The next precept is, I resolve not to engage in improper sexuality, but to lead a life of purity and self-restraint. So the obvious application of this is, don't cheat on your significant other. The not so obvious, gets into issues of lust. That's where we're really only harming ourselves. And, again, it's a personal journey. We all have to make our own decisions. It's important not to be judgmental of other people, but it's also important to, make your decisions with a heart of compassion. I believe it was Thich Nhat Hanh who said this. I could be wrong, but a guideline for this I thought was a really good one. Don't do anything you wouldn't tell your partner. Not a half bad guideline. How else do you draw guidelines for something like that? I couldn't come up with any, but I remember this and it kind of stuck with me. So where do you draw the line? It's a very personal journey. The next is, I resolve not to lie, but to speak the truth. The obvious one is, don't lie to people. That's a pretty easy one. The not so obvious is, do no harm. There's a story of a monks in the near a forest, and a lion comes out and runs one way. A minute later, the hunters come out and said, did you see a lion run by here? Now what is the monk to do? Lie or direct the hunters towards the lion? It's a tough one. Sometimes you have to just use your judgment when one precept conflicts with another. So where do you draw the line? Again, if you come at it with a heart of compassion, and that's your compass for this, not a bad way to judge your actions, or to be guided by your actions. Now, in terms of ourselves, oh my gosh, at least I speak for myself, but we lie to ourselves all the time. Just the denial. When I first started my Buddhist path, I was convinced I didn't do any suffering. And again, that may have been a little misinterpretation rather than lying to myself. But I look back through the years, and it's like, I viewed myself as, I never get angry. I was lying to myself. I can look back and see so many times where I've lied to myself. And I never really thought of this precept in terms of what we do to ourselves. But if you lie to yourself, it's going to make life more difficult, because seeing things as they are is one of the core concepts of Buddhism. And if we lie to ourselves about ourselves, our path is just going to be more challenging. So, lying to ourselves, it's like, oh, that chocolate layer cake doesn't have too many calories if I don't finish it, or yeah, if I sleep in late, it's not going to matter, or I can do this tomorrow. It's just the little lies we tell ourselves just to make our lives much more difficult. And the fifth, excuse me, I resolve not to cause others to take substances that impair the mind, nor to do so myself, but to keep the mind clear. The obvious application of this is, yeah, don't get intoxicated. That's kind of easy. We all get that. Not so obvious are the little things that, just getting absorbed into gaming or entertainment or any kind of escapism is a little bit of an intoxicant. It's a way of escaping our mind. So those are things we should be mindful of. And where do you draw the line? Again, another posting on a Facebook timeline, and a monk here is having a beer with sushi. Now, are we to judge him for drinking beer? He happens to be a big fan of IPAs, and he has no problem with having an occasional beer with a meal. Now, is that breaking the precept? It's not really for us to say. If that's something he does without attachment and it doesn't cause him any harm, that's his journey, that's his decision. It's not for us to be judgmental about that. So one thing I'd like to say is just that there's kind of a shortcut to all of this. If you just approach life with a heart of kindness in everything you do and everything you think, you're probably not going to be too far off. So here's a quote from one of my early Dharma teachers. Vice, virtue, it's best not to be too moral. You cheat yourself out of too much life. Aim above morality. When you apply that to life, then you're bound to live it fully. Now that, I don't mean to say you should live immorally or harm other people, but if in everything you do so with the intention of kindness and compassion, at that point you can kind of, let go of all this, and you just become the precepts. And when you make a balance between one precept and another, and in this instance, Maud, who I'm quoting here, she's actually stealing a motorcycle from a policeman, but she's doing it because she wants to save a life. And she made the decision that the life she's trying to save, of a tree that she stole from downtown, that saving this life is a more important precept for her to follow. So, and she's in this scene, which I'm going to post the YouTube link to it. I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful example of kind of rising above the precepts and just being pure, unadulterated compassion. And she breaks a few precepts in trying to save a life, and that's her decision. So again, the shortcut is just be compassion. Now, in an effort to get myself out of hot water for that last slide, I'm going to quote our teacher, Tai Kozen, who often says the Mahayana path is to learn how to break the precepts. This is a similar sentiment. Sometimes you have to make decisions that are not easy, and just do your best. It's an individual journey, and again, quoting Tai Kozen, make it real for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Reverend Scott. That was absolutely beautiful, and just really appreciate. Oh my gosh, and you just put the YouTube link there in the chat if anyone wants to take a glance at that afterwards and see Maud get up to some hijinks there. And now we're going to have our second presenter to talk about Precept 6 through Precept 10. And after that, we'll open the floor for some questions. But yeah, next up, we've got Sa Di Phap Than, who is just wonderful. He's a novice monk. He's down in Texas. And he's someone that always like really, sinks his teeth into the Dharma and really gets into the nitty gritty and just explores it. And it's just absolutely lovely to witness every time that I get to be in some Dharma discussion with him. And without further ado, it's yours, Brother Phap Than.
Hello, Sangha. Thank you so much, Minyak. Appreciate that. And thank you, Reverend Scott, for that wonderful first 5 precepts. Absolutely inspirational. Tough act to follow, but I'm going to try. So let me go ahead and get the slideshow set up here for us. And wait, it helps if I hit screen share first. Okay, let's see. Okay, so everyone should be seeing this momentarily. All right, can everyone see that? Well, I say that, but I can't see everyone, so hopefully this is working. All right, I think I see Lily in little screen, so excellent, thank you. All right, so I will be presenting the bonus material, our extra 5 precepts that we get for being members of this wonderful Sangha here today. So I wanted to go ahead and start off by sharing a quotation here that recently has really spoken to me, studying a book called Stepping into Freedom by Thich Nhat Hanh. It's introductory materials and lessons for new novice monks. But it has this Zen master Gishan, and it says, with your beautiful and deep aspiration, you can climb just as vigorously. Always ask for support from great teachers and friends, and you will surely benefit the world. Practice the precepts with all your heart, and a wholesome result is certain. So this is something that there's a section in the book which comes from encouraging words written in the 9th century by Zen master Guishan, who is speaking to a group of newly ordained novice monks, and he was giving them advice on how to stay on the path, stay in the practice, stay true to their precepts and aspirations. And this was something that kind of stuck with me, and I wanted to share it all with you, as many of us here are going to be taking our refuges and precepts again, and for the first time. So this is something that gave me a bit of gasoline for the engine to keep going. So next, so my approach to the precepts is as a support to practicing the Eightfold Path. So throughout this presentation, I'll be referencing specific items on the Eightfold Path as they relate to each individual precept, at least 6 through 10. And I will also have references to any sutras or texts that I'll be presenting in here. That way, if you wanted to further study it yourself, and like Lily mentioned, I like to sink my teeth in. So if anyone else gets their appetite whetted by what I have on here, I'll have all the references throughout the presentation, so you yourself can go and further your learning on this topic. So the precepts as steps on the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is also known as the Araya Magga, or the Great Wheel, I believe is what Araya is. Wheel, path, or path. It's right on there. No, that's probably wrong. But it says, in this way, this is a quote from the Buddha. It says, in this way, I saw a timeless path to be traveled by the rightly self-awakened ones. And what is this timeless path revealed by the rightly self-awakened ones? Just the Noble Eightfold Path, the Nagura Sutta. So just showing that this is the way of which to reach liberation or true happiness. So each precept has its root in the Eightfold Path. If the path is the body, then the precept is the blood. The practice of the precepts gives the training and wisdom necessary in everyday life to realize and actualize the Eightfold Path in a meaningful and tangible way. This makes the lofty ordeals of the path obtainable and relevant to monastic and lay practitioners alike. So what I mean by that is the Buddha gave us a very simple method for reaching enlightenment or for reaching awakening. He says basically follow the tenets of the Eightfold Path with the wisdom of the Four Noble Truths, and essentially nirvana is attainable. But of course, as Reverend Scott had mentioned, we're given these precepts as a way to support the practice, give us guidelines, give us, as he mentioned, the quote, speed bumps along the road. They keep us on the right path. They're buffers. And in my opinion, the precepts are a really good way to buffer our understanding and practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. So, number 6 is I resolve not to speak of the faults of others, but to be understanding and sympathetic. So this has its roots, in my estimation, of wise or right speech, sama vaka. Abstaining, which in its essence is abstaining from lying, malicious or divisive speech, abusive or harsh speech, or idle chatter, referenced in the Magga Vibhanga Sutta. So I went ahead, and you're going to see some Bible quotes. I think there's maybe 4 or 5 in here. And this is mainly, I wanted to stress that the practice of the precepts is not something that can only be successful as a Buddhist or a practitioner of the Dharma. These are all guidelines that anybody, they have roots and identical practice in all kinds of faiths. These are practices that can enrich anyone's life, regardless of background. So the first quote I have here is just to stress the power of speaking, of words. Is in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This always struck me as very powerful back when I was a Christian practitioner, in the fact that, of course, we learn in Genesis that God created the world, he spoke it into existence, and here we learn in the first line of John that this word was powerful enough that it was God itself. So take it as you will, but it's a good historical reference for the power of speech. And in Proverbs 18:21, it says that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Those who love to use it will eat its fruitage. This explains the cause and effect nature of the words that we use. The words that we speak and the stories that we tell ourselves, they create our reality or our perceptions. With venomous words, the heart is poisoned. We all know this. If someone says something not so nice to us, not so harsh, we feel a very tangible, visceral reaction within ourselves. Words are just these things that fly through the air for a moment and then completely disappear in a second. They're not material, but they have real and lasting effects. They are causes in themselves that bring multiples of our conditions in themselves, that bring multiple of causes in our lives, almost unescapable. So I wanted to also share that these precepts aren't meant to be taken as something that's negative, like don't do this, don't do that, stay away from this. These are, as we mentioned before, these are guidelines and practice. These should enrich your life. These are things that should free you up, make you feel more at ease in the practice, more at peace in the practice, and give you motivation to keep going. So it's a very good saying that I like here. And all of this here is from a writing or a speech by Thich Nhat Hanh. So first he goes forth and he says, there is a saying in Vietnamese, it doesn't cost anything to have loving speech. We only need to choose our words carefully, and we can make other people happy. Now, this is something that I really like, especially for nowadays, when what we say can really get us into trouble. It doesn't cost anything to have loving speech. No one ever gets canceled for being kind or loving or compassionate. At least in my, I've never seen anyone kind of put in the hot seat for being a nice guy. I mean, but as we've seen lately, being a jerk can really get you in hot water nowadays, and rightly so. I mean, people should be held accountable for what they say. I mean, we have freedom of speech, but if someone's being particularly unkind, it's okay to try and correct that behavior, but in a kind way yourself. Because remember, as long as you're being kind, it's not going to cost you anything. You're just going to benefit others and yourself. So if we practice listening and speaking according to Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, we too will be able to open the universal door and bring joy, peace, and harmony and happiness to many people and alleviate their suffering. Now he goes forward and he references the Lotus Sutra here when referencing what he just said. The universal door manifests itself in the voice of the rolling tide. Hearing and practicing it, we become a child born from the heart of a lotus, fresh, pure, and happy, capable of speaking and listening in accord with the universal door. With only one drop of water of compassion from the branch of the willow, spring returns to the great earth. That's some wonderful poetry. It just speaks how a kind speech, a compassionate ear can be like water of life back into a desolate heart, a desolate world. If you want to study this further, which I definitely recommend, Deep Listening and Loving Speech by Thich Nhat Hanh. He also has a great speech on compassionate listening. And, or I believe the speech itself is on Avalokiteshvara, but he goes into being a compassionate listener. That is absolutely wonderful. If you want to do good in the world by being a compassionate person, listening is a really good way to start. Just being able to open your heart up and accept. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to number 7. I resolve not to praise myself and disparage others, but to overcome my own shortcomings. So this has its root in wise effort, samavayama, the effort of avoiding or overcoming unskillful qualities and developing and maintaining skillful qualities. So what do I mean when I say right effort when it comes to praising myself or disparaging myself? Well, arrogance and pride are what you would consider unskillful qualities. They create a condition within ourselves that makes it difficult to truly improve, get better. Instead, we just create a facade wrapped in the pride. And then with disparaging others or ourselves, we do the same, just in a different fashion. So this also has its root in wise or right mindfulness, samasati. There are, and this is a quote directly from the Magga Vibhanga here, this is the case where a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, aware, and mindful, putting away greed and distress with reference to the world. Now, I saw this fitting mainly because when one is mindful of our own self, we're mindful of our own place in our environment, the causes and conditions of our own beliefs, and when we look deeply at ourselves through mindfulness, being truly present in the moment, seeing things as they truly are, trying to look deeply, this brings about a right perspective in the moment that makes it difficult to really hold yourself either in more esteem than others or less esteem, or see others as more or less. It brings about, with right mindfulness comes an equanimity of perception that allows us to see the moment in a compassionate and equanimous way. Now, next we have wise and right view or understanding, which is essentially what I touched base on just now, but understanding based on the framework of the Four Noble Truths. And that is that everyone, so the first noble truth we know is that life is dukkha, life is suffering, unsatisfactory, unfulfilling. It's not quite there. It needs some sort of, the longing, the craving is inherent within the being. So with right understanding, we see that everyone else is in the exact same boat that we are. They suffer the same cravings, desires, letdowns, disappointments, but also other people also have great traits, talents, attributes that give them value and worth just like ourselves. So with right understanding and right view, we see things as they truly are, and this opens us up to being non-judgmental or not putting anyone, ourselves or anyone else on a pedestal or knocking them off a perceived pedestal. So there's virtue of equanimity and speech. There are two expressions of a disharmonious view of self, and that is to see oneself as greater than others, giving rise to pride or arrogance, and seeing oneself as less than others, giving rise to defeatism. Both of these things are equally dangerous to the practitioner. So this is a quote from the Rajan Sutra. It says, searching all directions with your awareness, you find no one dearer than yourself. In the same way, others are thickly dear to themselves. So you shouldn't hurt others if you love yourself. So an interesting bit, when I was researching this and trying to find information for this, I wanted to use the quote that I heard Tai Kozin use so often. And it's one of the most wonderful things I've ever heard. And it goes something like, you can search everywhere in the world and you will not find anyone else who is more deserving of love and compassion than yourself. So I tried finding that quote and I found it's not actually a direct quote from the Buddha, but is inspired by this line here, this sutta here, the Rajan Sutra, which is a really good sutta. I recommend people, anyone interested, look it up. It's a discussion between the Buddha and a king about having right perspective when leading his kingdom, and it's absolutely wonderful. But like all other phenomena, we too have no separate individual self. To put oneself in any other position other than null, which means no competition with, or equal to, meaning in the exact same standing as, to, we miss the truth of the Dharma. To miss the opportunity to free oneself from the suffering of judgment through pride, we become blind to the heavy karma we create for ourselves, unable to improve without significant delusion of ego in the form of a psychological or social dilemma. Now, what I mean by that, to be more simple, is just that when we have pride, we've all come in contact, hopefully not in life, but it happens often when someone who's very arrogant, or maybe someone's narcissistic. There's a lot of energy that goes into continuing to keep up that facade. And it usually goes at the expense of others' self-esteem. And then that can also play in the exact opposite way. But essentially what ends up happening is eventually someone's going to want to put you back into your place, or someone's going to want to recorrect. The universe has a way, either socially, psychologically, or physically, of rebalancing itself. So because when through pride we become blind to any cracks in our facades, we don't want to improve or correct. We want to maintain. But this creates friction in our lives, and it makes the path more difficult. We can't progress without significant obstacle. So through self, now on the flip side, through a self-deprecating view, when you never see yourself as either equal to or better than anyone else, we fail to see our own virtues and value, limiting our ability to benefit ourselves and others. When we fail to see that we have value and the ability to do good in the world, we never take the chance to actually try. But when we all understand that we all have goodness, value, and worth that is also worth sharing, this opens us up to actually follow through with helping and benefiting others. Now, each of these situations cuts off the opportunity to allow true Dharma to liberate us and others, stifling the karmic healing necessary to transform the ego into a useful vessel of awakening. We only need to reflect on any of our traumas in the past to see how they were shaped by the words and stories that we spoke and formed, how mindless words spoken in anger and resentment created long-lasting wounds in our heart, or how a compassionate ear or inspiring speech seemed to bring the light back into the world for us and give us the motivation to persist. So I want to give an example here from the Buddha about the power of our speech and how it can be used skillfully. It says the Buddha was often stern with Brahmin leaders. These were like the religious and social higher-ups at the time. And they put themselves in the pinnacle of society and spirituality, but could not see the vanity of their own views. So I wanted to also mention here the Dhammapada chapter 26 speaks on what it is to be a true Brahmin. Now this references like one who has overcome temptation, stamped out the fire of anger. This person is a true Brahmin. Or he goes forward and says one who practices mindfulness unfailingly, who continues in his efforts to cross through the shore of liberation. This one is called a true Brahmin. And it shows he wanted to correct a wrong view that he saw in these people. But he did it in such a way that was skillful and compassionate, showing people the right path that leads to liberation, not in something that's going to diminish anyone's ego or raise anyone's ego, thus leading to more delusion. So he used skillful means with his speech. So this was never harsh, but it revealed true teachings. And it makes me think of, which I didn't put on here just to save time, but the quote from the Bible where Jesus spoke about the Pharisees, and he said, "You are like whitewashed sepulchres. On the outside, you're clean, but inside is nothing but death and decay." That's a good example of using corrective speech, but it's not so kind. Here, the Buddha corrected without really making anyone feel too bad about themselves, hopefully. So here, number 8, we have, "I resolve not to withhold spiritual or material aid, but to give them freely where needed." So this, of course, has its root in right livelihood, sama ajiva, abstaining from dishonest or harmful means of livelihood, or more specifically, abstaining from ways of supporting ourselves, feeding, maintaining, and housing ourselves that causes others to not be able to do the same for themselves just as easy. So I wanted to explain here just a little bit of why this is, why compassion and generosity are so necessary for the path. So we live in this, what's called the world of desire, or the kama dhatu. This is the lowest division of the threefold world. The world of desire is so called because its inhabitants are ruled by the desires such as hunger and sensual craving. So this was revealed through the first noble truth that life is dukkha, it's suffering, it's like this because of craving. So this is the reason, this is the consumption, or this hunger and craving is the base energy of this world. It forms the groundwork of all of our actions, or essentially our unmindful actions, or our non-awakened actions. When this is unchecked or unrefined, it leads to hoarding and greed, often at the expense of others. What I mean by unchecked, I mean by just, you can think of it as, what's that word? I had an example for it, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. Or just say greed. Or unrefined, basically meaning we're not putting our efforts into the right direction, to the right path. And this causes ourselves and others to suffer. Now, we can take nothing with us when we die, only the consequences of our choice, what we've done with what we are given, our karma. Now, this has been revealed through the Buddha's 5 remembrances, the last remembrance being, "My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground of which I stand." So what we take with us when we die is only what we did, not what we obtained or could hold on to. So it says, this is a really good quote that I love from the Bible. It says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So I love this one just because it shows that when we have a generous heart, we're really bringing more benefit. Why hold on to things that can bring us more suffering? Say if I have a safe in my house with $1 million and someone comes in and breaks the safe or steals the safe, I'm out that $1 million. I will be very upset. But if I decided to, say, create a charitable organization that benefits millions of other people, and I lose all that money trying to support that, I generally won't be sad about that. In fact, I'll probably feel really good. So by collecting valuable things and trying to hold on to them and identifying with that, identifying with possessions and ownership and self-value as far as a monetary or possession-wise, it just opens up the door for unnecessary suffering and worry. And we're here to be free. We want to feel light, free, happy. And really, the less you have, the less you have to worry about. So by practicing loving speech, which the previous precepts we studied, we invoke compassion into our world. But by practicing generosity, we invest into a compassionate future. By following this precept, we put our money where our mouth is. We actively contribute to a society with less division and suffering. funding a future of abundant joy. With each well-spent hour of volunteering, because not all of us have money to give, but we might have a little bit of time, or a dollar donated, we strip off heavy karmic ties that keep us incarnating into struggle and strife. If we instill the value of contentment into our hearts and alleviate our own worries and suffering, we can create an environment of sharing and trust. Now, an environment of sharing and trust allows us to truly, it opens a lot of doors. So when we distrust others, when we think others are out to get our possessions, we tend to hoard and not share, and others suffer from that. But when we trust others and we have a compassionate heart, the doors of opportunity just open up everywhere. So this also applies not only to money, but to the great, not only to our monetary storehouses, but also the great storehouse of Dharma knowledge that we accumulate. This has to do with spiritual aid. So truth that liberates one from suffering eternally is the most valuable commodity in the universe. As a recipient of this knowledge, we have an obligation to share freely this life-saving teachings. And I mean this to share with an open hand, not to push it onto people. What better way to practice non-attachment than to freely give away that which is the most liberating and beneficial to others and also ourselves? To show the unity of being through the acknowledgement of the interconnected nature of all things. When my cup overfloweth, yours becomes full. So anything that I gain that I do not need, I give to others who need. Now, this is, of course, a goal, an aspiration. We will all have our own methods and abilities to fulfill this precept, but whichever way we can, as long as our heart is genuine and our intent is pure, we will eliminate heavy karma and lighten ourselves up for a better future. So number 9, I resolve not to indulge in anger, but to exercise restraint. So this has its roots in wise, right intention and resolve. Sama sankappa, which is it's resolved on renunciation, loving kindness, and harmlessness, and also right action. Sama kamanta, abstaining from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. So someone, now this is a reference for the Kodana Sutta. I split it up, so just to let you know, this isn't the full quotation from the sutta. It was much too long, so I just extrapolated the common themes here. So someone, a man in anger hurts, but when his anger is later spent with difficulty or with ease, he suffers as if seared by fire. This secret place, the fire, with anger's aid is where mortality sets the snare. To blot it out with discipline, with vision, strength, and understanding, to blot each fault out one by one, the wise man should apply himself, training likewise in the true Dharma. Let smoldering be far from us, then rid of wrath and free of anger, and rid of lust and free from envy, tamed and with anger left behind, taintless, they reach nibbana. So this is just wonderful when we abstain from anger, when we eliminate the defilements that come with this sort of negative way of being, of seeing, of reacting to ourselves and our environment. It sees that the path opens up, nirvana becomes evident. So I want to share that fire consumes the righteous and the unrighteous alike. I love that example. Buddha was like, when you're angry at someone else, it's like holding a hot coal in your hand and hoping the other person's getting burned, but really all that's happening is you're the one who's feeling the pain, the suffering from that anger. So that old red-eyed demon anger taints the perception as the antithesis of kindness, leaves little room for understanding, the basis of compassion. Anger makes an enemy, transforms friends into rivals, and once beautiful relationships into shells of resentment. It is a fire that consumes all things good and leaves ashes of regret in its wake. Now, what's really important is to witness Dharma truth, to encounter the flavor of the Dharma requires a calm, focused mind and a peaceful heart. Anger stirs the mind like a raging storm. It ignites those old survival mechanisms dormant within us that sets the mind on a path of self-preservation into a prison of violent reactions. The still waters of self-reflection ripple with delusion. This makes it very difficult for us to delve deep into understanding. When something unpleasant happens and we're in a fit of anger, it is not our higher thinking that is making decisions. It is that reptilian brain within us that wants to survive that instead reacts and makes that decision for us. In that moment, we are not truly mindful. We are not truly ourselves. We are entirely something else. We become the anger. Gonna move a couple little things here so I can see. And there we go. So we may at times feel justified in our anger. We may at times feel that being angry at people going to war, people taking advantage of others is justified, and perhaps rightly so. But remember, it's what we do with that energy, what we do with the anger that is important. So I wanted to share quickly a story. I wrote here, this is a segment from the Angulimala Sutta. Angulimala, depending on which version of the text you read, was either a thief, a Shivite sacrificial priest, or he was a murderer. Or perhaps other things, but essentially he was a violent man. Angulimala in Pali literally means a necklace of fingers. So he would cut off the fingers of his defeated opponents and wear them like trophies. So not a nice guy, someone you wouldn't you wouldn't think of as a compassionate person. So, but the Buddha was repeatedly warned not to seek out this man, not to try and help him or save him, because he would end up killing the Buddha. But the Buddha, being fully awakened and liberated, had no fear. Fear, as we know, is a flip side to anger. A lot of times when we're angry at something is because we fear something. We fear to lose something. We fear change. We fear perhaps harm to ourselves. But the Buddha had eliminated the roots of anger and fear within his heart, so he had no reason to fear Angulimala. In fact, his compassionate heart showed, well, even if he did get killed by this man, he would have done so trying to save him, fulfilling his heart of the Bodhisattva. So he chased after Angulimala, ends up finding him and chasing after him. And as we see here, it says, then Angulimala, seeing this contemplative, the Buddha, with sword, shield, bow, and quiver, followed on behind the Buddha. But Angulimala, ever running as fast as he could not keep up with the Buddha, walking at a normal pace. So he stopped and shouted at the Buddha, "Stop, contemplative, stop." The Buddha replied, "I have stopped, Angulimala. You stop." What happens next is recounted in this short poem. While walking contemplative, you say, "I have stopped." But when I have stopped, you say, "I haven't." I ask you the meaning of this. How have you stopped, but I haven't? The Buddha replies, I have stopped, Angulimala, once and for all, having cast off violence towards all beings. You, though, are unrestrained towards beings. That's how I've stopped, and you haven't. Angulimala was being driven, motivated, and controlled by his rage and anger. He was still going. The Buddha eliminated these negative mental states, was at peace, never going anywhere other than towards the road of compassion. So our last precept here is number 10, and it is, I resolve not to revile the three treasures, the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha, but to cherish and uphold them. Now, this one was a little difficult for me to research, because I thought, how is this even possible? As practitioners like us, who are going to be taking these refuges, how can we revile the triple gems? How through thought, speech, or action can we fail to uphold, or how can we continue to uphold this? We're all here to learn and maybe even participate in this. So how is it that us as good Buddhists, or maybe not good Buddhists, can end up reviling the triple gem? So I studied further, and I had to look into it and said, well, to revile just means to criticize in an abusive or angrily insulting manner, just to kind of shoot down on. But to cherish is to protect or care for, to hold on to. So I said, okay, let's approach it this way. So I decided to write some examples here. So The first is how to revile the Buddha. And I thought, well, a really obvious way is to blatantly defile the Buddha image. Or also, since we are all Buddhas, just we need to wake up to it, and we have that nature, to disparage anyone's ability to recognize that nature or to withhold the truth of Buddha nature, to see or believe that someone can be purely unsavable or unredeemable, particularly ourselves. This is one way of reviling the first gem, by withholding the truth of the Dharma, but by continuing to learn and emulate the teachings and deeds of the Buddha, by chipping away at the defilements that encase the pure nature within us. We slowly reveal to ourselves and to others the accessibility to walking the Buddha's path. This is how we can honor, how we can revere the first gem, by giving a good example through our lives and words, thoughts, and deeds for others. But then also being compassionate to the point with others, that recognizing that no matter how externally we feel someone is bad or wrong, inside they have the exact same ability as ourselves to reach awakening. Now, as far as the Dharma is concerned, to diminish or speak ill of someone else's path or their apprehension or comprehension of Dharma, to change or alter Dharma truth for personal gain, to hear Dharma wisdom that truly speaks to our hearts and choose not to follow it. Dharma can be spoken by the conscious, the silent voice that guides, or our true morality, that inner voice that tells us when we really, really want something, when desire tells us, but that conscious tells us maybe we should abstain. These little things that when we listen deeply and openly and are truly mindful in the moment, we make much better decisions. We give honor to Dharma, to truth, to real knowledge. But if, say we don't believe in someone else's faith and we decide to say, well, that's not true, or it's false, or it's brainwashed, or anything like this, this could keep someone from reaching the true path. Because take, for instance, myself. I've gone through many, many spiritual paths and alleys, some you may even consider a dark back alley, to get where I am now. Had I been disparaged, or I guess if I was making really bad choices, that would be good. There'd be someone helping me. But had I been essentially talked down upon or seen as I guess uncouth, I could have never gotten to where I am now, to finding Dharma truth now. So we have to be supportive to others, even if we don't agree with their path specifically, as long as they're not harming themselves or others. We should present Dharma truth to them and let them find their way. So through the understanding and propagation of the Buddha Dharma, by instilling, then living the path, we become examples here and now. We become non-judgmental practitioners seeking to help and benefit all beings, regardless of any external conditions, be it race, gender identity, faith, social status, whatever. As long as we are open and present the knowledge that we know to be so valuable to others, we are revering the Dharma, thus keeping from reviling it. So we have to also remember that how to revere or defile the Sangha. We have to remember that we are a great Sangha, Maha Sangha. We are much bigger than our little isolated groups that we tend to collect in. So to look down on, or to think that anyone else is better than our particular Sangha, this breeds a mind of division, encourages pride or pity. But Sangha is meant to be equanimous. I can never say this word, equanimous. I guess that's it. So I went ahead and looked up the root of this word, Sangha. So here it means that it stems from together, or to be one with, together with, to come into contact. So this is a community that works as one when making decisions, when benefiting each other. It's not that there's a grand meister who makes all the decisions and the rest of the community body has to do it, or anything like that. It's a truly democratic approach to spirituality, where everyone supports each other in an open and honest environment, all working to support our own awakening. so that everyone awakens. It's the fulfillment of the Bodhisattva vow on the macro level, not just the micro within our own lives. So this is a quote from Taking Refuge here. So this community of cultivated believers who travels on this joyful path together, who practices to free each other from afflictions and to work to beautify life. Community, harmony, and cooperation are virtues that give honor and support to our great Sangha. By supporting each other and supporting our monastics, teachers, and centers through dana, almsgiving, participation, and volunteering, we build this community stronger and stronger. This allows us to have a future Sangha better able to reach out and help more and more, and opens us up for just absolutely a greater future to allow this great knowledge to propagate. Now, I wanted to end with this comic, which I found great pleasure in. It says, mainly because I love talking to my cat, though he doesn't really talk back. At the very essence of existence, there are no boundaries separating us. So we really are the same, you and I. The cat says, I think not. And I love this one because on many different levels, it has such great Zen knowledge. So that's what I want to leave you with. So I'll hand this back over to our wonderful host.